Welcome to Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly radio show about the current state of Ultimate. I'm the host and the editor, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me, Ultiworld senior editor Keith Rayner. It is May 31st. We are 2 days after the D1 College Championships finished up in Mason, Ohio. Keith, it was quite the tournament, but after it was all said and done, we got three-peats in both divisions as the University of North Carolina coming away with the title. The men's team winning 15-12 over Massachusetts in the final, and the women's team winning 15-8 over Colorado to complete an undefeated season and truly just a dominant year in which really the closest game they played at any point the entire year was against Stanford in quarters, and they won 15-12. Maybe the most dominant season we've seen from a college team in quite some time, Keith.
It was not an unexpected result, but still an incredibly impressive one. I think that it was a bit surprising how much they kicked everybody's butts. Maybe we were kind of hoping against hope that we'd get a little more of a thriller for UNC somewhere on the line, that maybe this title bout was going to deliver for us. But they were pretty thorough in their execution and how much they just pressed their advantage whenever they got one. I think it was I was with Katie Killebrew on a call earlier in the weekend, and we were talking about that kind of Fury effect. You know, people used to say teams would play Fury and like you basically start the game down 3-0 before you step on the field because just you're playing Fury. And I wonder how much UNC is benefiting from that, because it just feels like the game's already over half the time, you know, for after the first 3 points. You're like, yep, UNC's not going to just give it away. I guess this game's over already. Charlie, you with me? You're muted if so.
My bad. I had to switch my microphone settings. Hopefully I sound better now that I'm on my actual mic. It auto-selected my AirPods.
You do sound better.
Nobody said anything. It must have sounded horrible. Look, it's not surprising that UNC dominated and that they won this tournament, but I don't think, I certainly didn't expect them to crush as thoroughly as they did. I mean, in semis, their O-line had no turnovers. That's ridiculous. I just, and you know, it's not like they were perfect against Colorado in the final, but they didn't need to be because Colorado offense couldn't get anything going against the UNC D-line. Oppressive performance from Pleiades, and to win 3 straight titles. You know, even if you want to call the Winter College Nationals one kind of a wash, kind of an asterisk, you know, even going back to back is difficult at this day and age, and for both teams to pull it off is kind of remarkable. And it wasn't that close in semis or finals for either of the teams.
It really wasn't. And I'm not exactly sure why that might be. Like, I haven't quite parsed out what the big separator was, because it isn't like we felt like these teams were so markedly better than the other iterations of UNC that we've seen, or that the field was weaker than other iterations of fields that UNC has had success against in either division. So, I mean, I think you said during the original live show, our preview show, that you felt like UNC was going to get a challenge, and it never really came. I don't think that they were just a buzzsaw all year, that they were like unbeatable all year per se, but nobody was able to capitalize on any opportunities that they presented. And they're so good that when they play their B game or their B minus game or whatever, they can still beat the best teams in the country. Like that's an incredible place to be as a program. It opens up so many opportunities for you and options that no one else can really possess. But when you have a strong hand in a game of poker, it's all about maximizing what you're getting out of the pot, and you feel like they're maximizing, right? They have an incredibly strong hand right now. But what they keep doing is finding ways to utilize it to maximize what they're going to get while they've got all the cards.
Well, it's worth pointing out the men's team did get challenged. They very much could have lost that game to Brown in quarterfinals. And Brown played probably the best game they played all season. And Jacques Nissen was spectacular, probably the best player on the field in that game. And it still wasn't enough. It still wasn't enough. Darkside was able to get the one break they needed in the second half in an extremely clean game to take the advantage of being able to go out on offense on Universe Point, and they were able to close out the win. But it's not that Brown was incapable of competing in that game. They were right there the whole time. They're up a break, early in the game. So I think we saw them face that challenge. We saw them pass that test. And then I think in some ways they were fortunate to get two teams that hadn't been there before, really, as their next two opponents. And Keith, as you joked in the pregame, like they had to beat the entire New England region basically to win the tournament. But I don't know that Vermont and UMass were quite ready for the level of execution that is required to win those big games deep in the bracket at nationals. And I think both of those teams are probably poised to come back stronger from it. But UNC is going to be there waiting for them. I can tell you that.
Yeah, but looking specifically at the men's division, it's hard to really expect these two teams to be ready for that, right? Like even SLO to some degree, I think has some obstacles to them being a really ready-made contender once they get to semifinals. And maybe we should have spotted that earlier. I mean, I guess if you were on the Colorado or Pitt or Brown train and you have these teams that are a little more seasoned in playing in that environment, maybe we've been underrating how difficult it is to go across that barrier into the semifinals and then be competitive there, because it is, I mean, it's a distinct line in what actually being on the field is like. Right? The stadium effect. And I stand by like what you having a plan for what you're going to do between quarters and semis. Like I think the more confidence you feel in that moment, the more prepared, the more you're like, okay, I know exactly how this situation is going to go. I think the better set to perform well you are. So I think that it's not really a surprise to me that Vermont and UMass were quite the level. I think it was a great credit to UMass how much they did look prepared for semis. I think they mostly just got outclassed in the final. They had to play two really great games in a row, and that's really difficult even for a team like that. They're pretty young, so I do think that they're going to get better from this. But I think that UMass probably overperformed what I would expect, given that they were in such a new environment and the team wasn't even at nationals previously.
I know. I completely agree. I mean, I think part of the way that you win a title is that you get the experience of being in the spot of semis or finals and usually taking some lumps. That's typically what we've seen. And
I preach this all the time.
UMass had the classic amazing semifinal performance followed by kind of flat finals performance. Now, obviously, a lot of the credit has to go to UNC for making the adjustments from earlier in the year, applying pressure, not making it easy for UMass to kind of hit the big deep shots that were working so well against Cal Poly the day prior. And, I said it coming in, it was like, if Luca Harwood hits his Hawks, they could beat UNC. Well, he didn't. He was off. The whole team was off.
Rip Cody Mills. I'm sure you saw his tweet about this.
I saw his tweet. Yeah. Yeah. Why don't you read it to us, Keith? I'm
not going to dig up the exact thing, but basically it was like, there's no way that the team that like couldn't miss against us in semifinals goes ice cold in the final again, as that happened to them in a previous year in the semis as well. So yeah, I mean, I think SLO kind of took their chances a little bit with UMass. They're like, all right, let's make them play the deep game. And like, man, did that UMass was hitting perfectly. And that was not the case when they stepped on the field against North Carolina.
Overall, we see pure chalk in the women's division. All the 8 top seeds advancing. The top 4 seeds advance to semis. The top 2 seeds advance to the finals, and the 1 seed wins it all. And for most of that time, it was pretty clear victories along the way. I mean, I feel like I've seen such clear stratification, not only from the overall seeding level, but literally down to the seed, each team better than the previous. And I don't know if you rewrite a couple of these, if UBC and Vermont play in semis instead of UNC and Vermont, maybe you get an upset. Who knows? But it felt like games were close. There were some close pre-quarters. Stanford and UCSB going to a 14-13 game. Stanford kept it interesting against UNC in quarters for a little while. But, ultimately there were no games closer than 3 goals in quarters, semis, or finals in the women's division.
I think that I guess hearing that I'm struck because to me it felt like the tournament was a little more interesting than it looks on paper. You had, maybe it's because of the preconceived notions about teams. Maybe it's just that we're in the business of narrative building. And so it's easy for me to get attracted to those things. But there were, you had the Northeastern over Colorado. You had UCSB, Carleton. You had Tufts' the tough struggles that them getting blown out by Vermont. What does that say about these other teams? Vermont looks so good. Are they really? Vermont and UBC looked like 2 of the best teams outside of UNC. Were they going to surpass Colorado? I thought there were some really interesting storylines. Stanford's performance against Colorado too. That bore out during the tournament that looked a little more like there was depth. I think the quality of play showed in that top tier like we thought it might for many of the teams. And then you had things like Northeastern and UCSB maybe indicating that maybe there was some chance that you could see an upset somewhere along the way. And ultimately we did it. And there ended up being a lot of blowouts, both in pool play and in the bracket. I was going through and doing the game tiebreakers, and there was one of the questions about how many pool play games will be decided by 5 or more goals. And there were a lot in the women's division. In particular, there were a lot in the men's too, but there were even more in the women's division, I feel like. So it was a tournament where there were definitely pretty big gaps between the teams that were in the mix and weren't. And I don't know if UNC made it feel like there was an even bigger gap than there might have been. I'm torn on how much of a boring tournament it was. You remember last year we said it felt boring. Do you feel like you were bored by this tournament?
No. This was a much better tournament than last year's tournament. I think there was intrigue in pool play. I said it earlier that the pre-quarters and quarterfinals rounds were probably the 2 best versions of those that we've ever had. Even when some of the games ended up being 3-goal wins, it felt like they were competitive throughout. It wasn't just 3 early breaks and then cruise control. So I felt very compelled, but it must be said, semis and finals were duds. Total duds. I mean, not a good game in the mix. Some fun moments, some cool highlights. Enjoyed watching, Harwood hit the deep shots. Mika Kurahashi was a bright spot for UBC. The clinical offense from both UNC sides. There were moments, but the games just weren't there. And
there was a second for Slow and UMass where it was Slow got the break in the second half.
Yeah,
and you're like, this could be it. This could be the turning of the tides. This game could come down to the wire, and UMass was able to break away from there.
But I mean, just look at some of these individual performances. Look at the final on the men's side. Ben Dameron, 3 goals and 5 assists on just 1 turnover. Rutledge Smith had 3 goals and 3 assists. Jack McCleary had 3 blocks. And even on the UMass side, Wyatt Kelman had a goal and 3 assists and just 1 turnover. He played really well. Obviously, his return was huge for UMass. I think it became even clearer to me after this weekend that he was the best player on this UMass team this season. And when they were missing him, it was more than just his stat lines. It was like the offense just wasn't quite right. And when he came back and Stang Osborne came back, things just were so much better for them the whole weekend. They looked like the team that we saw dominate during the regular season and even beat UNC. Unfortunately, I think they just didn't get their best performances from some of their players. McSweeney had 3 turnovers, Harwood had 3 turnovers, and they just didn't quite have enough defensively against UNC. They only ended up getting 2 breaks in the game, and they'd gone down a quick 3 breaks in the first half, and that was kind of that.
UMass was impressive, particularly obviously the semifinal against SLO, where it just felt like everything was working. They really ran deep into their roster. Like there are teams that talk about it, like, oh yeah, we played all 27 in that pool play game or whatever. UMass was doing the semifinals when the game was still a game. Like that, they some people talk about it. UMass is about it. You know what I mean? Like I respect that, and I think that they felt like that was a strength for them. Like, we can do this in a way that other teams can't. We can leverage this advantage. So I was definitely impressed with that. And they're a team that makes doing our individual awards difficult. They're tough to evaluate in that way, but they also brought a lot of fun moments. I mean, that Jonas Stang Osborne shimmy shake after the break throw is the most popular Instagram reel we had for the weekend. So the people love it. The people love a good show.
Well, and just some fabulous individual performances. Harwood, we talked about him hitting his shots. He had 6 assists and no turnovers against Cal Poly.
And they were that undersells it. I mean, if you watch these Hucks, they were hitting the back line just over and over. Like you can't ask for more out of a deep thrower than that.
So on the women's side, some incredible performances there as well. I mean, Sydney Rader had 2 assists and 4 blocks. Ella Jungst, a goal, 3 assists and 2 blocks. Teresa Yu, 5 assists and 2 blocks. Obviously, blocks fantastic. A theme. Oh, Yu was fantastic all weekend. And, the O-line overall just extremely impressive. UNC spreading it around. And Bailey Shigley, I thought, was a bright spot in that final for Colorado with 4 assists and just 1 turnover. Unfortunately, they had some of their higher usage players elsewhere had a lot of turnovers. Gaskill had 3, Abby Gillock had 4, Khalil Phillips had 3, and so they just weren't able to overcome some of the mistakes that were happening, and just a great pressure from UNC.
And they just weren't able to get UNC's offense out of their rhythm. They do not play with the defensive acumen that we've seen from them in other areas. They're such an athletic team, and I think that makes it difficult for them to defend a team that's so quickness and technically based. And that I think was where, even more than their offense failing to execute, I think we've seen that before from Quandary, but you don't really see their defense get overpowered like this that often. So that I think was where I really was like, oh yeah, this could be tough for Colorado to get out of this hole if they're not going to be able to fly around and make plays and really get in the shorts, as people like to say, of the offense. Like I don't know what they're going to do.
I think we watched one of the great offenses in college ultimate that we'll ever see this year for UNC Pleiades. They had multiple games where they didn't get broken. They had multiple games where they didn't turn it over. And it's not like Colorado didn't have a good game plan. They poached the unders, tried to make them huck. They, tried to get the disc into the hands of the 6 and 7 players on the field. It didn't matter. Pleiades wasn't perfect in the final. In fact, they had a turnover on the first point. Just a missed under throw. I mean, essentially looked like a nerves turnover. But it simply didn't matter. That's how good they were. And what are you going to do against you and Barnett and Jungst? Just crazy level of offensive skill and the system to back it up. And so I guess, Keith, I want to ask you this. but we're probably going to the same thing.
Yeah, I bet we
Teresa,
are.
Teresa in the chat asked, where do this year's UNC teams rank amongst past iterations?
Ooh, we were not going in the same direction, but an interesting thought exercise. Look, the outcome, like the data that we have, says this is the best one, right? I mean, they thumped everybody. It was even fair out there. We talked about this, you and I. I talked about it with a couple of people, but you and I were talking about it in our final moments at the airport yesterday. But you wonder if last year's final, the conditions, the upwind downwind status didn't mask a little bit of the gap between the two teams, didn't play a little bit to Colorado's favor, but also keep the score from ballooning in any real way. So, maybe that would make last year's team look a little better, like stack up a little bit better.
I still think this year's team is better.
Yeah, I think like from just a pure talent standpoint, I think it's a little more flat, but you just see the team understand their identity better every year. Like the game plan is stronger every year. They're just better at executing it. They get a little smarter. Like the coaching staff's developing, the program's getting better. Like, so I think you're seeing a little bit of just an upward trend, really.
Well, I agree, but I do think this is probably the best UNC team we're going to see for quite some time. We just saw it. But now they're going to lose some of the best offensive players in the division. Youngst is gone. Barnett is gone. Connerly is gone. And I think that they, will obviously still be a great team. Don Colton is returning among many of their other excellent players. But, the bottom end of this roster is not blowing you away. It's not like their rookies were world class. These are mostly new players who are obviously playing alongside some of the best players in college and a great coaching staff, but they're not U20 selections. So what is this team going to look like next year? It's going to be interesting. But I think if you're just looking at this year's team, this is the best UNC Pleiades team we've ever seen. And I think it's up there among best college teams of all time. That's maybe a conversation for another day. I think it's less clear on the men's side. We've talked about how this UNC men's team didn't feel like it had that kind of dominant takeover player who just felt like, the best player in college. But on the other hand, Ben Dameron, like, what more does he need to do for you to feel like he's that one of those guys? Like, he was fantastic this weekend. And they have a lot of guys that are almost as good as Dameron. So it's hard for me to assess that because I do think we've had some, individual talents that feel almost transcendent for UNC dark side teams of the past that we didn't necessarily feel like we had this season, but the depth has maybe never been better.
I think I pretty much land in the same boat. I mean, you have this like Gooch, Elijah Long, LSB trio that were all on the team together, and then you have Anders and AD at the same time, and maybe we've just had more of a chance to. Maybe those players had more of a chance to surprise us. They have already gone on to so much other success in club and semi-pro that maybe we have a higher estimation of those players. But to me, that group strikes me as a little bit more talented at the top. And I was yelling it at our Airbnb yesterday. I'm nuts for Ruts, baby. Rutledge Smith is great. The Ben Dameron Rutledge Smith combo is awesome. But it's LSB is just like a different breed for me, and I don't know. I don't see either of them quite at the LSB Matt Guccianis level.
Sure,
but
sure.
We had the famous quote from Roger Crafts, right? When we were interviewing him, and we asked who the highlighted individual performer from first half of a Seattle Sockeye game, and he said team ball. And UNC might actually be able to answer that sometimes. Like, it literally is like yes, they're obviously hyper talented. They have all these U24 guys, blah blah blah. But like, the system is winning them games sometimes, right? Like, we have a thing that we do, and nobody else can do it as good as us. Like, I don't know. It's some days it's you're a big Dylan Hawkins guy. Like, some days it's Dylan Hawkins who's going to go out there and kill you, right? Like, it's just that felt more apparent for this dark side team than we have the best player on the field and there's nothing you can do about that.
Well, Keith, you have another UNC question. What is it?
Well, it's at some point we got to talk. Like, we're getting a little bit into the historical significance of this UNC run. You know, you look at you obviously we have two different programs to talk about, but I think that the three-peat of the women's side probably merits that investigation more than anything else. I think. There's more longevity for the men's division team, but the women's team is like meteoric rise. So you look at the three-peats right in history that we can talk about in college ultimate, or UC Santa Barbara did it twice in the men's division, and Stanford did it in the women's division. I think for a lot of people, those are essentially like the starting points of the greatest teams in college ultimate history.
Stanford did it twice, for what it's worth. They did it in 97 to 99, and then they did it again in 05 to 07.
Oh yeah, they did. You're right. I forgot about their early run. So I mean, that's a lot of catching up to do, I guess, in some ways for UNC. But I also think, like, I wasn't around then, obviously, but I think winning a title now is probably harder. I don't think that's like a particularly bold take either. So, like, what does it mean to see these two teams have this success? What does it mean to see the women's team three-peat right now and do so pretty dominantly as far as like the historical significance here? And then there's a follow-up here that's actually going to come from our mailbag.
Well, look, again, the 2021 titles definitely are a little funky because you had this kind of bonus players, and even the current titles in some ways have to be considered as slightly different than in past years because of sixth year eligibility. Like, that does have an impact. It does favor big schools with graduate programs like UNC, and it also favors teams that are already good. So that lack of turnover, the fact that you have players playing for many, many years, can mean that you're more likely to get dynastic elements because you have, instead of a bunch of players turning over, you get to have them for an extra year or two.
You kind of get a 2-for-1 really with the winner, the 2021 winner, right? Like,
well, right.
You're winning your titles 6 months apart, which is a lot. Right. Your team is a lot more.
But they were different teams.
Obviously different. They were.
You got to acknowledge, right? They were different teams. There were players, the lead players, for example, on the men's team at the Winter 2021 Nationals were not there for the 2022 win.
Yeah, I get that, but you also, like, there's a lot more continuity than if those had been a year apart and they also were different teams.
But at the end of the day, in the history books, we're going to look back on this as we're going to see combined three-peats for one school, which that's never happened. That's never happened. And I mean, I think this is historically great college ultimate program that, in the case of the men's side, has been great for so long, it's hard to even believe it. 9 straight years of being in semifinals.
Still got that weak ass Seidler score, though.
I mean, people still talk about Pittsburgh as this like top tier men's program, and when is the last time that they've like had back-to-back semifinal seasons? It's they won back-to-back titles in 2012 and 2013. It's been 10 years since that. Not that they're not a great program. They are, but it's UNC is the gold standard in both divisions for at least the next 5 years and maybe beyond.
Shout out to Middlebury, by the way, for the pranksters women's division team joining the 3P club. We wouldn't want to race you. Don't worry. Yeah, that pit title, by the way, those back-to-back titles is the last time that they made semis 2 times in a row. I guess. Well, there you go. Yeah, that's the last time. They made quarters almost every other year that they missed semis, but that is the last time they made semis back-to-back. I'm pretty sure.
This is Rutledge. This is Kevin. This is McKnight, and we're 3-time national champions, and you're listening to Deep Look.
So I want to jump into the mailbag here, but before we do, I want to tell the folks at home about Nutsy. Now, if you are a high school player looking to improve your game and meet players from around the country, you should consider going to the National Ultimate Training Camp, or Nutsy, this summer. Many of the players that attended Nationals at D1 and D3 either went to Nutsy or will be working at Nutsy this summer. The schools include Pittsburgh, Cal Poly SLO, Middlebury, Vermont, Northeastern, UMass, many others. You know some trends there. Are those some of the best teams, or am I talking hot air right now? Now, session A sold out, but you can get more info on the other sessions at nutsy.net. There are scholarships available. I'm a Nutsy alum myself. I hope to get back to Nutsy and do some coaching. It is a great place to meet people throughout the community and people who you will be friends with and see at tournaments for the rest of your career. Maybe even further if you decide to coach or become part of the game in some other way. But I still cherish the memories I have from Nutsy, and I definitely would recommend it for any player looking to get better and looking to meet people in the community. Again, check them out at nutsy.net.
I'm Alex.
I'm Sydney. And I'm Ella, and we're your 3-time national champions on UNC Pleiades, and you're listening to Deep Look.
All right, Charlie. This is a question that's percolating. It was even prior to this, but this just was the pin that's stuck up against the wall. Yeah, I mean, this is particularly, I think, we can decide if you feel like the men's division is different in this regard, but is this bad that UNC is so good? Is this bad for College Ultimate? I'll even give you the exact reading because this came in from Daniel Prentice, and I want to give him his due because he said specifically, I am not an anti-dynasty person. So he said, are the D1 college divisions in trouble? I'm not one of those who believes the dynasties are inherently bad for sports. I think it's great for the narrative to have someone to root against. But is it a worry for the future of the short to medium term future of these divisions that Carolina teams have been so dominant? What do you think?
Well, it's boring. I mean, I'm sorry to say it. You know, when we have essentially uncontested semifinals and finals with UNC just destroying the teams that they play, it's hard not to feel like it's kind of a air out of the balloon at the end of what was otherwise a really good tournament. We both picked UNC to win the tournament at the beginning of the season. We both picked UNC to win the tournament in our pre-tournament podcast. We both picked them to win on our pre-finals picks. There was no point at which it was not very clear that UNC was going to win the title. And so, you know, when the teams go combined, you know, whatever it was, 60-1 on the year, it's a little bit dull. Now, the question is, what does that mean for the division? You know, I actually mentioned this topic basically to a USA Ultimate person at Nationals. And they said, this is what pushes other teams to get better. And there's some truth to that. You know, you think about the things that have created innovations in Ultimate. It's when there is this dynastic team that everyone is trying to figure out how to beat. And so they come up with some new system or some new scheme or something, some strategic decision-making or some player development model that helps them finally get that win. And other teams are going to be facing that now with UNC. Now, the other thing is, I feel like the recruiting in terms of where the top young players are going has not been UNC this past couple of years. Now, all credit to the excellent youth programs that the Carolina area has, but this is not an inevitability. As the 6th year eligibility rolls off in a couple years here, And as we see some of these top players start to graduate, which we're already seeing with the Pleiades team after this season, I think we're going to start to see them come back to the field a little bit. And we're going to see programs like Colorado, like Oregon, like Washington. I'm trying to think of where, Carleton, Vermont, even UMass, where there is this pipeline of young players who are really good U20 selection type players funneling into these schools. Has UNC really been a destination school for top youth players? Surprisingly, if you think about it, the answer is no. If they're not already from the Triangle, we're not seeing people from Seattle going to play at UNC. They either play at Washington, they play at Oregon, they play at Colorado, maybe Cal Poly SLO, Carleton. That's it. And so is that a problem for Carolina long term? It might be. And so as suffocating as it's felt like, to me, this is like pushes other communities to develop their youth programs, number one. But it also sets us up for a situation where when these top recruits start to fill into these other schools, like the Colorado men's team and the women's team, the pipeline of quality talent coming into those schools right now is insane. I think we're going to see other teams start to win titles soon. In fact, I'll go ahead and say it. Too early prediction. We're not going to see a UNC sweep next year. It's not happening.
I agree with you. I think that the negative effects here are like I struggle to really see what they are outside of being a little boring as from a like narrative standpoint. Like our kids choosing not to play Ultimate because why bother if I'm not at UNC? No. Like our teams not trying because why bother if I can't beat UNC? I don't think that's happening. Is every player attending UNC or nothing else? Like is it going to be UNC A versus UNC B in the national title game? No. Like yeah, we groan and we gripe. Our media tent was rife with barbs for UNC throughout the semis and finals. The crowd had plenty of jeers or whatever, but nobody holds it against any of the UNC people. I don't think. Always important to remember, just hating on someone for sports reasons is not the same as actually disliking them. But also, like, I don't see what is going to happen in Ultimate that's so bad because of UNC being good. That I do think I think it pushes teams to get better, although maybe not as much as people would say. Like, teams were going to do that. Somebody was going to win. Somebody was going to be the best team, and that team will always push. Everyone's going to try and beat that team, right? Everyone's going to try and push to be better. I don't think there's a lot of teams that are like, well, we have to. Maybe there's one or two. Maybe you're Colorado or Pittsburgh or whatnot, and you're like, well, you have to beat UNC. But everybody else, I think, is like, let's be the best team we can be. And they probably would have done that if UNC had won or Colorado had won or UMass had won. That part doesn't play so much for me. But I do think they kind of sharpen the meta a bit. And in that like strategic sense, they push teams forward because you kind of know the target that you're aiming for. So in that sense, I do think that they've developed such a strong strategy identity that I think that you're going to see teams really hone in on tactics to conquer what is becoming the dominant meta in the game. And I think you're seeing that already start to happen. So in that sense, I do think they'll push forward. I also think that, like, we talked about this, I want to say after Club last year, where we were talking about different communities and North Carolina being the villain. Like, are they not the model for what we say you should do to be a great Ultimate community? Like,
true. They
built it from the ground up, basically, by investing in Youth Ultimate, and now everybody's really good. Like, this is what we should. This is the thing we say everybody should try and do, and they do it, and now they're bad for Ultimate. Like, I don't. It doesn't track for me.
I mean, also say that look at the ratings from big sports. People love dynasties. People love to watch a favorite. there's never been better ratings for the NBA than when the Warriors and the Lakers were going head to head, or I guess it was the Cavs at the time. LeBron
That's actually
versus
a great
the
point.
Warriors.
UNC is more likely to bring in money or attention to Ultimate by kicking everyone's ass than we are by there being like 5 or 6 really good teams. Like, it is more likely that UNC will bring, like, you look at the UNC documentary, which I haven't had a chance to watch yet, but like that type of attention could have value to the community in a way that like no one's going to make a documentary about there being 6 really good teams that could all win the title. Like no apparel sponsor or whatever. No college is going to jump in and record. Like, maybe UNC's college wants to help promote their teams or in some way. Like, who knows what kind of opportunities this opens up for them that could benefit the community at large and not just their school. But like, that stuff's not happening if we're just all playing really well and the field's wide open.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's much to say on this topic. I think the thing to remember is that in College Ultimate, you're going to get these pockets of dominance from a team because they have a very, very skilled group of players who come in together and play together for 3 or 4 years. And I mean, look through the history of the women's division. We have University of Oregon dominating at the beginning of the previous decade.
At the time, it felt like that could last forever, right? It felt like, will Fugue ever not be amazing? Like, I think that we could be saying the same thing about UNC years from now.
Yeah, and then we had years where Oregon wasn't even at nationals, and then we have Dartmouth, right, dominating in 2017 and 2018. They almost get the 3-peat, but they lose to UC San Diego in 2019 to end their run, and now they're an irrelevant team that doesn't even go to nationals anymore. I mean, didn't they go D3 this year? Like,
they did, but that is over. That felt like it had an expiration date on it when it was going on.
So that's just how it goes. But I mean, I think that's why you have to give extra credit to the Dark Side team. 9 straight semis is incredible. And but that they have only won 5 titles only, I say.
Embarrassing. Step it up.
But as good as they are, and as many of those years that they've been favorites, they were the favorites in 2019, and Brown beat them. And so, look, this is just the nature of it. I think the 6th-year eligibility thing has really kind of made things feel more, sort of entrenched than they actually are. Stagnant. And eventually, it's going to roll off the books. So, Keith, I want to talk about some other teams, and there's so many fun stories from this year. We've already had a chance to talk about them.
They should try winning some games if they want us to talk about. No, I'm just kidding. That's what UNC says.
What were your favorite stories from the weekend overall? Just maybe pick out some teams or some players that you found really fun or interesting.
Well, I mean, you touched on one earlier that jumped out to me, which was the return of Bailey Shigley. Like, wow, what a performance for Bailey, and to see her come back from such a tough break from an injury standpoint. Like, that was a lot of fun to watch individually. I mean, obviously the most important thing is the Stanford win that didn't happen over Colorado. I was just so close. We're so close. And someone from Colorado even gave me some guff about it. It's like, sorry we couldn't deliver for you, but which is a great chirp, high quality chirping. I'm for it. They dropped the pre-quarters round. Like, what a pre-quarter round. Like, that was, it's a little sad that was the highlight of the weekend, the best round of the weekend. We usually love to keep that for semifinals. But that was definitely a highlight. Like, so much drama, and the actualization of the field pass dream in some ways. We were bouncing around. We talked about it during the game. People are running from field to field to catch these games as they come down to the wire in each one. So that was really exciting. Those are ones that jump out to me immediately. What about you?
Well, some of the just individual performances. I mean, goal leaders in the women's division: Sage McGinley Smith and Devin Quinn, both with 22. McGinley Smith, what a revelation. I mean, Stanford was so awesome. I feel like they really reached all of the potential that they had and played just about as well as you could. I mean, what more can you do? You go up against UNC, your best players have really good games. I mean, I think you do, Esther Philippek in that game, 2 goals, 4 assists, 2 Ds, but she also did have 8 turnovers. Of course, she's taking all of the toughest shots. So, you don't want to knock her too much for the turns, but man, they were super fun to watch. Devin Quinn and Santa Barbara reaching their potential too. Julia Hasbrook is second in assists at the tournament. And, Hasbrook to Quinn was a devastating weapon. And they almost beat Stanford in quarters. Or was that pre-quarters? I guess that was pre-quarters, right?
Yeah.
14-13 Stanford over UCSB. I mean, that matchup was not close earlier this year. So obviously bright future for Santa Barbara with Devin Quinn. So some of those just like individual players. How about Keith? Quincy Booth, 37 assists, including 11 in one game. What?
A rookie. Really, that was
crazy.
something. And that Georgia team proved to be real spicy. I saw some takes flying from them on Twitter too. I mean, they were living it up. Which props to them.
On the men's side, Carl Crawford, second in goals with 17. Daniel Chen, number 1 overall with 18. On the assist side, Eli Weaver with 25 assists. I thought Dexter Clyburn was one of my favorite players to watch this weekend. He had 22 assists to lead the way for Cal. And just like in the individual performances department, Jacques Nissen against UNC in quarters was just tremendous. And, so often you get used to seeing Nissen working in the backfield, working in the dominator, and maybe throwing some shots to the end zone, some nice assists. But instead, it was him as a downfield weapon, getting open in the deep space and making some crazy catches. He was phenomenal. That was such a fun game as a part of a round overall. You already said it, pre-quarters. Just phenomenal. I mean, and you get some close quarters too. UNC Brown, as mentioned. How about Texas playing within 1 of UMass? There are so many ways, Keith, that the entire tournament storylines could have been different if Universe Point goes differently in 1 or 2 games.
That's for sure. I mean, there are definitely some of those turning points lying around. Like I think those forks in the road. Where it very much could have been a different ball game altogether. I mean, one of the mailbag questions we got was if Brown upsets UNC in quarters, who goes on to win the title in the men's division? That was not far off from happening. That Vermont team that made semis, like I don't know how many of their 9 lives they have left, but they were using them up quickly throughout the tournament. I mean, for a second, it looked like they might not make a pool play. And boom, then they turn around there in semifinals, having a great time at halftime, going toe-to-toe with UNC. Like, things change quickly around here sometimes.
Okay, and I want to ask you about this because it just got mentioned in the chat, and it's been on my mind, and I know this is going to be one of the most difficult decisions to make. In the Rookie of the Year conversation in the men's division, it felt pretty clearly that Declan Miller was going to win the award based on what we saw from him this season for Carleton. Playing not only as probably the best player on Carleton, I shouldn't even say probably, he was the best player on Carleton this year and is in the All-American conversation coming into nationals. And then he can't play because he got hurt at the alumni game. And so he doesn't play. And meanwhile, Micah Glass goes absolutely berserk for Oregon and was one of the best players in nationals, frankly. So Keith, where do you fall here? Does Declan Miller still win this award for you, or did Micah Glass do enough at nationals competing that you think you're going to vote for him?
I'm not certain what I'm going to do, but I know that Declan Miller is going to be on my ballot, and I don't think it's going to be at 1. You really have to, like, for me, nationals counts for like half your grade or more. And turning it an incomplete there is just hard for me to swallow. Like the awards very much are output based for me, and that it's unfortunate. Like I don't think that it's his fault or whatever, but it's not the other rookie's fault either. So there are some great rookies to recognize, and I think Miller's performance overall is going to merit being on the Rhodium. But I don't think that will have him at the top of mine ballot.
Micah Glass,
Sadly.
11 goals, 17 assists, 6 blocks, 18 turnovers. Pretty insane.
I mean, the women's division conversation for rookie of the year is also ridiculous. Like I don't know what's going to happen there. I'm genuinely worried we are going to have ties. Like I don't know if we're going to have to come up with tiebreakers or something. I don't want to do co-roadies, but that might be what we have to do. Right? This is an editorial conversation now. This podcast for Pull Back the Curtain. Charlie and I are going to figure out what we're going to do right now. But yeah, there's like 4 or 5 A-lister rookie campaigns in the women's division too.
Yeah, it's. I mean, the awards voting is kind of conversations are rolling and more to come. But I mean, I think there's interesting conversations pretty much every spot this year. Player of the year is not an obvious lock. I think in the men's side, I'm coming in and even most of the way through nationals, it's like pretty clearly to me going to be Henry Ing, but he really didn't play very well in their loss in the bracket. And so then, you start to ask questions about like, well, wait a minute, does one of these UNC guys deserve it? It's not an easy topic. By the way, Callahan Award given out during semifinals. On the women's side, Abby Hecko from Washington, the favorite, gets the Callahan Award. And on the men's side, in what certainly has to be considered a surprise, given that, I think most people expected that it was going to go to Ing. But that is not, in fact, what happened, Keith. And instead, in maybe what shouldn't have been seen as an upset because the video got the most views of anybody on the men's side, Justin Burnett from Emory wins the Callahan Award. And he was wearing the full Arizona Iced Tea styled Juice jersey and track pants combo.
Yeah,
pretty
they're
nice.
They're pretty nice. Yeah, they're like flowy pants. I don't even know. Someone more inclined can tell me what exactly the name of those pants are. But yeah, they were. He definitely had his full swag out, and wow, that I think caught maybe other people by surprise. I still think I've long complained about how the amorphous definition of the Callahan leads to different people having different ideas of what the award's going to be. But I still think the most popular definition, particularly in the men's division, is akin to the Heisman. It's the Heisman with an asterisk that says, if you're not a jerk. That's basically the whole award, I think, in most people's minds. And so it was like, oh, well, Henry Ing's going to win it. He's not a jerk. And he's the presumptive best player, right? But I don't actually think that is what the award is anymore. So I think that people who are caught off guard by that, just need to realize that's not what people are looking for. Justin's a really talented player and a really valued member of his community. And not to say that Henry isn't, but it's not about. Nobody is up there losing the award. The people who don't get first are not losing. It's not a head to head in that way. I wouldn't say so. At least I don't frame it that way. So there's Justin's seems like a really incredible guy, and it's definitely sweet to see him win and to see another Black Callahan winner. They're few and far between, and now more than ever, which is a great sign for, I think, the inclusion in the division in some ways. Long way to go, but it's definitely good. And EMORY, that's the Eagle battle cry, baby. Emory represent. There were some folks in the Discord talking about as a player from a team that they've never even gone to nationals, ever won. And I don't know what the conclusion was on that. There's maybe one example or something. We've had players for whose teams were not in nationals that year win. But this is the most like off the board I think we've ever seen that award come from a team aspect. I mean, they didn't even make semifinals at Southeast Regionals, right? Like, this was way out there, which is all the more credit to Justin for building up that kind of profile.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is to me is fairly clearly like the video is so good he won award, right? I mean, I don't think were people going into this process thinking Justin Burnett, like, you know, let's say in March, where people are like, oh, I'm going to vote for Justin Burnett for Callahan. I highly doubt that. Maybe in the Southeast, but that's, you know, putting together a great video, showcasing your skills in the best way possible. That's what it's all about. And, you know, we've seen this many times before.
I wonder how much
it's not necessarily an award for who the best player is. Although, you know, who's to say what Justin Burnett would look like if he was playing for a top tier team that goes to the bracket at nationals? He could very well have had a much higher profile in that sense.
And I think there is a non-negligible benefit to the fact that Emory went to California for 2 years, right? Especially this year. Like, being able to have voters in another part of the country see you play and be really impressed. And if you talk to the players from Southwest teams who played against him, they were like all about him. Like, maybe they voted for Calvin Brown 1, but he was 2 probably on a lot of Southwest teams ballots. A lot of teams that were at that tournament with them saw that he was the real deal. So, you know, getting your name out there definitely helps. Like, you want people to be familiar with you. I really wish we knew numbers. Like, we don't really even have a sense of how many people vote, do we? Like,
I don't know.
Based on how people vote in other things in Ultimate, not a lot of people vote. But maybe that's not true here. Maybe this is an exception.
I can say that you know, Donovan voting certainly is not representative of every player in the division. There's not that many votes compared to how many people could be voting.
If you sway 2 teams, like, that could potentially do a lot. Like, yeah, that could be a lot of important voting points going your way.
Yeah, but overall, man, it was a really fun tournament this year. You know, in a way, it's hard to quantify sometimes, like what makes it fun or not. You know, so often it feels like we define nationals by how good the semis and the finals are. Well, we haven't had a competitive final in what feels like forever, and the semis have been hit or miss. This year they were a miss, but the rest of the tournament was really interesting. We had like exciting moments in pool play with some crazy I mean, how about Northeastern making the bracket by beating Colorado, who was playing its starters late, even though they didn't need to win the game. And that win getting them in over Virginia. And then Virginia was, maybe it wasn't Virginia. Somebody tweeted that Virginia should have gotten in over Northeastern.
Georgia tweeted. I told you Georgia was being spicy. They tweeted that.
So they tweeted that. And then Clara Stewart for Northeastern is like clapping back at Georgia on Twitter. It was good stuff. Good stuff.
There's definitely, yeah. The Georgia said you're just lucky you played Colorado last. I did see some conversation because while that
yes
that Colorado game, like that, my understanding is that Quandary was, they weren't going all out, but they were not rolling the bench in. Like the starters were playing, they were playing a fairly even rotation. They're a good deep team. They could put their bench out there and still be competitive. But it wasn't like when we had games on stream where like top end players had decleated. You know, this was not that. I did see some people talking about like, is there a way to structure the tournament so you're less likely to have teams just phoning it in the back end of the rounds where things should be most exciting. So that's something to think about. I did walk away from this tournament with things about that I would like to see done differently. And some of those have been talked about already by other folks, but there's definitely some stuff that I think there are things that we've talked about in other years, but like it's time for some changes, Charlie. It's time for some changes.
Well, I think we should talk about some of them. I want to point out a couple of things. One, in terms of the scheduling, there's naturally an advantage for top seeds who win their early games and often are in a position to basically sit there all of their starters for their last game of pool play because they've already locked up the pool. And we saw that happen this year. I mean, there were times where straight up like teams played the bottom 11 players on their roster in a game. You know what? Cornell beat Pitt.
That's
Pitt.
That's just
because
history.
Pitt was not playing anybody
just,
of meaning. That's just history. So here's my problem. And how about this? This is very related. The first game for Vermont Chill, the 3 overall seed of the tournament, is at 3 p.m. on Friday, the second to last round of the day. So they play their 2 games that day at 3 and 5 p.m. Their first game of the tournament is against the 2 seed in their pool, Cal Poly Slow. They get killed, and then they proceed to go all the way to semifinals. But they had to fight through it. You know, they barely beat Michigan in their second game of the tournament. And then they had to eke out a win over Carleton that put them into a more favorable pre-quarter. But why in the world is the 1-2 matchup the first game of the tournament for the number 1 seed in the pool, and it comes at 3 p.m. on the first day of the tournament? I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me. I think that there's always going to be some awkwardness with these 5-team pools because of everybody has to have a bye, you know, anytime your pool is playing. But I don't think it makes sense to have these 1-2 games happening early in the, you know, on day 1, and then having like 1 versus 5 seed games happening at the end of pool play. That is just giving the 1 seed an extra advantage to be able to sit starters most of the time. There were way too many instances of that this weekend. There's no reason we can't schedule the 1-2 games to be at the end of pool play, like it is in pretty much any other format when you play normal pool play.
Charlie.
Yes. Yes.
It's you. I think it's your fault, actually.
My personal fault?
I'm half joking. Yes. I mean, I think that they're staggering the rounds to thinking that in order to, the best way to stream all the 1-2 games, which we often like to do, is to have them staggered out and spread out. And, you know, obviously there's a way to do that. That doesn't necessarily mean that you get all of these imbalances, but there's many different factors of scheduling. Like we're also talking about, well, you don't want the 1-5s to play at the very end of the tournament either. So like every time you add a restriction, the harder it gets. However, maybe the recent developments in our streaming capabilities mean that we don't have to be beholden to staggering the 1-2s anymore, and that could take a restraint away that makes scheduling a little bit easier. But
there's still a way to do it. If I'm
putting on my USAU hat, that would be one of the things I'd say is like, well, we spread out the rounds for the media, for the fans, you know.
I agree that is that also something that should be weighed. There are 8 1-2 games. By definition, they're not all going to happen in the same round because of the schedule of nationals. There's always 2 pools out in a given round. So even if they were the last games for each, you know, pool, you would still have 2 rounds with 4 of the 1-2 games, but you could probably stagger it a little bit more than that. I think I want to see it avoid a situation where the 1 seed 5 seed matchup is the last round of pool play, and the first round of pool play is the 1-2 matchup, which happened in multiple instances. I just don't think that makes sense from a competitive standpoint.
It's hard for me to figure out exactly though how to legislate out like teams resting starters. Like if you lock up your pool, you're going to be empowered to do that. And if you're playing a bad team, you're going to be empowered to do that. If your team's like way better than the other team, like
yeah,
there's nothing we can do about it.
You're not going to completely sit your starters against the 5 seed in your pool if you have the 1-2 game that's going to determine the pool later in the day.
Right.
Now you maybe are still going to run a more open rotation because you're way better than them. And that's fine. I'm not saying you should legislate it in any way. I'm saying you should change the schedule to not allow teams to straight up let their players take off their cleats. I will admit, I haven't sat down and really thought about the schedule and how it would work. But I mean, I feel like this is a competitive imbalance that is overly favoring already stronger teams.
I'm very confident that one of our listeners has or will do that.
But Keith, you mentioned other things you'd like to see change. What would you like to see change?
Well, let me slide the drum over in front of me. This is because I'm going to play Charlie's instrument right here. Man, we got to get the finals at night. This is
a Charlie type beat.
Yeah, we got it. We got to get the finals at night. Make them Monday night. and figure the rest out. Like we got to figure that part out because the game is just more fun at night. There's just no way around it. And the finals have in club and college often felt secondary. Like I am there. The energy is lower on finals day than it is in semis. And that's stupid. That's dumb. You don't have to rent the whole field site for an entire another day if you just have the finals Monday evening. You have one division's finals start at 5:30 or whatever, and the other one start at 8 or 5 and 7:30 or something like that. It won't be as brutally hot on the turf. If we're gonna stay in these turf football fields, like make it easier on everybody.
But let's why don't we just not do that too?
That's coming next. That's
Watching
coming
the
next.
okay, it's coming next. All right, go
That's
ahead.
coming up. That's coming up next. And this ties back into what we talked about prior to the tournament of making nationals a destination event. Now you have this whole day, and it's like, okay, how do we make this interesting to people? Right? Like people are just going to fly home, and there'll be nobody attending finals. Finals are already too sparsely attended anyway. But what if it's like an event? What if there is stuff that people want to do during the day? You could have jersey trading sessions. You could have Color of Ultimate showcase game followed by coaches all-star game. You could have a concert. You could have you could do the Centex dance competition, like whatever, just anything that the kids want to do besides the stuff that they're not allowed to do that they try and do after hours and
that they try and do
stopped by the police. Yeah. You can't do that, obviously, but like do some stuff during the day that they want to do. And so people come and they hang out together and they get to know each other. And it's kind of like the national social vibe. And then everybody stays and watches the finals that night and eats dinner. And it's an event and it becomes part of being at nationals. It's like, oh, I want to go to nationals. And like, if you're a 5 seed or whatever, and you're like, yeah, obviously I want to win a game, but if we don't, we can go play in the throwing competition. I want to root for our teammate who's going to be in the longest pole competition or whatever. Like whatever that thing is, like just talk to the players, the participants, and like try stuff out. But that way you can have the finals tonight. You also get the big event feel of nationals. And I think you could really enhance the entire experience and potentially, like, obviously there's financial costs to doing this too. There are hopefully ways to help make up for some of that. But that's not necessarily my forte here, but I do think that's one way to change things. Do you have thoughts on that, or do you want to move on to grass fields talk?
I mean, I obviously agree. And I think there's a couple of choices, right? Some people are, what's the pushback, right? So why wouldn't we do that? The pushback is, well, people need to go home on Memorial Day, Monday night. Okay, so make the tournament Thursday to Sunday and then let people have Memorial Day to do whatever they want or go home. It's also not very expensive to fly on the morning of Memorial Day.
There you go. I was just going to ask, when's the most expensive time to fly in this? Is it Tuesday morning, Monday morning, Sunday?
Well, yeah. I mean, people like make up fake reasons why we can't have an extra day, like work day of national. I mean, frankly, people were saying to me before the tournament, wow, it sucks that you only have one day of streams while I'm working. Like, people want to watch the tournament on weekdays because it's better than weekends. And like, what's one extra day? Most of these teams are getting in 2-3 days early anyway. And the most of them are out of school. So I feel like you need to make it work. Like, you just have to tell people this is how it is. And then it will be fine. But I couldn't agree more. Watching these games happen in like 90-degree temperatures under harsh sun, when nobody like wants to be sitting outside in open sun bleachers, it just isn't as fun. It's just not.
And you make a great point about the viewing thing too from home, because if you have the finals on Sunday night rather than like Monday, who's watching it from home at like Monday at
on Memorial Day? People are going to the barbecue. They are not sitting at home to watch the Frisbee game.
When do you sit down for appointment sports watching in the evening?
Okay, keep this in mind, Keith. Why is this happening? There's an important underlying issue. ESPNU scheduling of the finals to be aired live on cable TV. Now, whether like I have personal conflict of interest in this whole situation in some ways. So I will just point that out. But I would say that how relevant is it to have these games on ESPNU? Is it worth the trade-offs that are happening as a result? Like, for instance, having the games in an ugly football field stadium for some high school that is lined for football, has a giant high school football team insignia in the middle of the field, looks like absolute garbage on TV, and yields games on turf that no one wants. I do not think so personally.
That ESPN definitely, it feels attached to a lot of these ideas. Now, even if you just got off ESPNU and went to ESPN Plus, that would potentially deal with some of these issues, right? You don't have to worry as much about, are we going to be on in the evening when obviously ESPNU has other scheduling. That could potentially solve that problem. And as much as I hear you that it looks ugly from some angles on the football field, like, we were looking at our social media and we're seeing that we had a TikTok that had way more views, hundreds of thousands more views and likes than other ones, and it was on the football field. I think that when regular sports fans are like scrolling through clips, it looks way more legit to see that setup than it would be if we were just painting lines on a field in the soccer complex.
Oh,
so,
come on. It
really
looks like a soccer field instead of a football field. Like, who's actually judging it based on that?
But if we're outside some soccer complex, like if we let's say they had it at the field complex where we were with the streaming, look at the quality of the grass, right? Like, people notice that if it was in a professional football stadium, like a professional soccer stadium, it would not look the same as what it will look like when we DIY it in the Heritage Oaks complex. I'm sorry, it's not. And we could paint the lines. We could paint perfectly pristine ultimate lines. We can have, is the lighting going to be as good? Of course not. If you're at a big field complex and you're picking one field, like, those big soccer complexes are not going to have great nighttime lighting. Like, the
lighting in the stadium that we were in was terrible. Just FYI.
It is, but I'm just saying that when somebody's scrolling through their phone and they see what looks like sports in a place that they expect sports to be, like, they're going to be more engaged with it. That's all I'm trying to say. I'm fully on board with, like, let's get out of these stadiums though. I've seen plenty of sentiment. I think it's particularly popular on Discord and on Twitter, and like the spaces where like hyper engaged ulti people are, that I want the fields lined Sarasota style. I want everybody packing the sidelines. I'm not actually into that. I think that's not growth minded. But there's a medium ground. Our options are not like sanitized stadium with everybody 150 feet from the field and up against the fields like it's summer league. Like, those are not our only two options. So I think that there is something between those two that we could utilize, where we are at grass fields in a complex, and you have plate seating, right? You could put seating on grass fields. It's viable. We don't have to
literally just did that.
Right.
We did it in California for Winter Nationals. They brought in stadium seating and put it at the grass fields, Keith.
And this field that feels like what we should be trying to do. Now this, unlike the thing I was talking about with the scheduling for going from ESPNU to ESPN Plus, ESPN would never go for this. I don't think. I don't know what USA Ultimate would have to pay ESPN contract for them to be willing to do this on this style. So this, to me, feels like you have to untether from ESPN to make this a potential reality. But to me, it seems like it's
you're
what the
wrong about
want.
that. I think even if they wanted to do the ESPN thing, I mean, look, what the hell does ESPN care? It's a game on a field. Now, there's more work for the production company to get a lift and to build a platform for the commentators and, put in the infrastructure necessary, get a satellite truck maybe. But ESPN isn't going to care. I think the game just simply, right? The game presents better on a beautiful field with a USA Ultimate logo in the middle of it, devoid of extra lines and clutter, than it does on a high school football field. It's as simple as that. I don't think anybody would argue with that. And I understand the need for the infrastructure to have fans be there and have people be able to see. The sideline thing works until you want to have 1,000 people there, and then people can't see. So you have to have stands, you have to have food, you have to have bathrooms. You need this infrastructure for it to be a fun experience. But I do think we need to get away from thinking about let's rent the cheapest high school stadium, and we need to start thinking about where are there great 5,000 or less seat stadiums for soccer, lacrosse, or other sports where there's not clutter on the field in terms of lines. And how do we rent those stadiums? And then how do we find a field complex that's near enough by that this will work? Or alternatively, can you rent a field site that has a built-in stadium? Or thirdly, can we build our own stadium infrastructure at our field site? These are the ways forward, I think. And the model of the finals at 1 p.m. on Monday, it just feels like it's not working.
Yeah, the players just seem like it's not what they want either. So like when you have both fans and players being like this is suboptimal, I think it's time to redirect. And I know very little about stadium economics or availability. I did see something in the Discord to the effect of like the kind of stadiums that you're looking for. Nice grass stadiums are a dying breed. That maybe that's to do with the Earth's climate changing, and it's harder to maintain high quality grass. I don't know. Maybe it's just a capitalism thing. It's just easier to do turf. You can do high quality turf now, better. It's more accessible. But I think these fields are harder and harder to find. So I understand if like maybe that's not USAU's necessarily where they want to pour the money in. And yeah, I think that there is a bunch of stuff people don't think about that you're talking about. Like if you do want to keep the ESPN contract, yes, you have to have like good, reasonable bathroom facilities. Like where are you going to put the commentators? Commentators go in a press box in a football stadium. Where are they going to go if you're building that in the middle of a soccer complex? Like this is stuff that has to be thought about. What's your power situation? What's your internet situation look like? That stuff gets easier to do from a field, but as you know, it can be hard to send a signal into space from the middle of a field somewhere, right? Like
Starlink.
We don't want to end up. There's so many tournaments we go to where it looks so ugly because the fields suck. So like we have to find something that meets the bar here. But I think that's doable and worthwhile. And I think we all assume that the ESPN contract costs money. Like USAU is spending money to basically advertise via ESPN and have a high quality production, which in some ways you could put in the category of advertising. It's supposed to make the viewership experience more enticing. So like you might need to cut the cost there in order to afford being able to do the rest of this stuff. Like, I don't know. But yeah, it feels like it's time to change directions here and try and create a different experience for these final bracket games that are so defining for the College Ultimate season.
All right. Well, any other thoughts for today? Obviously, Keith, we're going to do a second show about College Nationals, as we always do. We've got to talk player awards
we're going to
and
have to
stuff.
hit this mailbag.
Yeah, we certainly are. But final thoughts on how things shook out and the teams that, reached the bracket or didn't reach the bracket, as the case may be.
This was a great college season, I think. Like I have no qualms about that. I mean, maybe like I said in the previous show, maybe I just have like made peace with our UNC overlords, right? Like it didn't feel like to me UNC had to lose for other teams to be good or for the season to be compelling. Even if we operated with the assumption like it was UNC's title to lose, like I don't know. Maybe I'm just used to it. So it's like the season wasn't defined necessarily for me by who won the title. I think we saw a lot of players who had really great seasons. I think the quality of play was generally really high. So I think College Ultimate is in a really exciting place. I'm definitely already looking forward to next year, but I got to spend this time looking backwards to try and do these damn awards. They made it so hard this year, Charlie.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. Like voting
for All-American is going to be really tough.
there are like 100 people between the two divisions that are going to be mailed out as potential All-Americans. Like that we are going to send the ballots out as a list. That's ridiculous. That's how many players feel viable to be voted as having one of the best 14 seasons. Like that's out of control, but I think deserved in a lot of ways. So it's definitely looking back on the season after that. Like I think Nationals was a lot of fun. I think it was compelling, and I think that tracks with the rest of the season.
I would like to take a quick look. Yeah. I would like to take a quick look at the 17th place games. That is the games between the pool losers. Okay, women's division. Georgia plays UT Dallas. They win at 14-12. SUNY Binghamton plays Carnegie Mellon. They win at 15-3. I can't believe SUNY Binghamton ended up finishing last in their pool after getting that big win early in pool play.
Kind of gave it away, but shout out to the Metro East. Shout out to Jolie Krebs. She silenced some haters. I don't want to hear that Metro East talk for right now. Let us have our time.
I genuinely did not look at these 17th place results until right now. So I'm finding out in real time with everyone else. In the men's side, Tufts plays Cornell. Tufts wins 15-11. Utah State plays NC State and wins it 15-10. So NC State goes winless. Weird year for the AC, huh?
Yeah, definitely was. I mean, remember when College Ultimate was needed to be torn down to the studs and rebuilt because the Southwest didn't get the bid and UNC Charlotte did? Like, didn't that seem like a million years ago?
Sure did. But I mean, to be fair, they clearly should have gotten the bid.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I get that. I mean, sort of. Yeah, sort of. But yes, like point being that like some of the stuff that we get obsessed with ends up not feeling like it was the story of the season or anything. Hey, I like I tweeted this in 2017. I retweeted it today. Just had that vibe. But Charlie, if you're the last seed at Nationals, you break seed by 3 or more spots when you just show up. Just get in here. You get to the fields, boom, broken seed.
I guess you can look at it that way. You know what? That makes the Money Melons look better, so I'm going to go with it too.
We love us some Money Melons. We people were talking. They had the streets talking. They were definitely America's team. Any thoughts on all the mullets? That was another thing people were talking about.
The mullets, what a crazy trend this year. I have no. I don't really know what to make of it. I don't know.
Charlie and I are bald. I don't know if people know that. But
yeah, there's no mullets happening over here on Deep Look. But hey, you know what? Good for them. Mullets for Mason, you haters, says Cody. I didn't see you rocking a mullet, Cody.
Yeah, where was your mullet, Cody? Don't give me that.
All right. Well, that is going to do it for this edition of Deep Look. We've got some great bonus content coming for our subscribers as well. So make sure that you get yourself a subscription if you don't already have one, and tune in for our Out the Back segment. We're going to take some mail. We're going to talk some more college nationals, and we've got a lot more to come. And thanks for everybody who joined us here live in Discord. And thank you all for a great college season, and much more to come right here on Deep Look.